teaches communications courses related to race, color, and culture, with a scholarship focus on visual rhetorical and otherness in popular culture. Her recent books include Deconstructing the Albino Other, a critique of albinism identity in media, and my screen just went totally crazy, so this is live. All right. Luso's Black, Female, and Fat Resistance, and Sustaining Black Music and Black Culture During COVID-19. She holds membership with and serves within the National Communication Association, Southern States Communication, and the Alabama Communication Association. As an albinism advocate, she talked about her experience during parenting a child with albinism and the importance of inclusive communications as 2019's TEDx Birmingham speaker. She routinely commits to ongoing work with NOAH, and as a former parent liaison, she offered information and support to parents with newly diagnosed children. She's been a two-time contributing author to our Albinism Insight quarterly magazine, and a guest speaker at NOAA's Parent Connections virtual calls. She has given special virtual talks and hosted roll-a-thons on behalf of NOAA. Dr. Pickett Miller is a devoted wife, mother of 2 humans, one with albinism, and a dog mom to a sweet Cocker Spaniel. Dr. Miller is joining us today and with her family, and without further ado, welcome.
It was that relationship and support, really by way of Lori, that I would say I'm here today. So thank you again, Karen, for the invitation to be here. And I'll let Lori know I said thank you as well. So raise your hand if this is your first NOAHCon. Awesome, so we're not alone. Thank you. This is my first NOAHCon. Family, raise your hand. Thanks for being here. This is about 10 years of celebrating or knowing about albinism. As the introduction stated, I have 2 beautiful children, a 15-year-old daughter who does not have albinism, and my 10-year-old son who does. So it's been about 10 years of knowing about albinism, but about 5 years of speaking and celebrating it and advocating for awareness of albinism. And really through public talks, my scholarship as a communication studies professor, and what I've learned through the years, and what I know with certainty now, is the focus of what I'd like to talk to you about today. Today, I'd like to focus on something that is in you. It's in me. It's really in everybody, and it's undeniable. It makes us unique. It is a powerful tool, and it can be a force if harnessed correctly. So it sounds like we're talking about magic, and I guess I kind of sort of am. We are in the land of the Magic Kingdom. But no, all fantasia aside, I'm talking about the power or the magic of your story. The truth is, I used to look around for what made other people special. I've always been others' stories. And to this day, I enjoy listening to a good personal memoir or audiobook. I've always longed for a mentor of sorts, somebody who could guide me through my path and help me make sense of what I was going through and experiencing. Maybe even give me an idea of what I should do. But what I've learned is that sometimes you have to become what you need. So for me, if I want to benefit from the experience of others, I have to be intentional about sharing my own. I have to be willing to share my story. Our stories include who we are, what we've experienced, how we feel, and our future. It's unique. Parts of it are ubiquitous, and nonetheless, it is deserving of being told. Our methods of sharing stories are vast today. We can verbally share stories like I'm doing now. We can write, text, post to social media. We have fashion that we can wear to tell our stories, hairstyles, decor. These are all different ways in which we can convey a little bit of who we are. Stories forge connection between people and our ideas. They convey our culture, our history, our values, and they unite us. And when it comes to communities like this albinism community, we understand intuitively that it is our stories that bind us and connect us. Yep, your story is that powerful. Now, as a social science researcher, I've got to back this up with a little bit of evidence. According to Harvard Business, telling stories is one of the most powerful tools that a leader has to influence, teach, and inspire. They build familiarity and trust and allow listeners to enter into the story right where they are. Stories make us more open to learning, and a good story can contain multiple meanings, so they're pretty helpful in conveying complex ideas. Stories are more engaging than a dry recitation of data. They help to make abstract ideas more graspable. And did you know on functional MRI scans, many different areas of the brain light up when somebody is telling a good story? Storytelling can be a way to give people with Alzheimer's or dementia a low-stress way to communicate. I know because I did this in the latter years of my father's life during his battle with the cruel disease, as it allowed us to communicate without relying on his memory. Recent research on narrative identity shows that when it comes to life stories, those who find redemptive meaning in past challenges and adversity, and those who tell their story with an idea that includes agency or exploration, are more open-minded, and they have higher levels of mental health, well-being, and maturity. Stories provide support and understanding of medical conditions. They underscore the experience of living with and supporting someone who's having a tough go at it. For example, Johns Hopkins developed a project called the My Path Story Group. The project was designed to create a trove of patient and family caregiver stories. So for people who were going through similar situations, the booth contained a chair, a microphone, and of course tissues to wipe away tears. It was designed to give clinicians information to better care for patients. They found that through the act of storytelling, patients created a narrative that helped them make sense of the difficult time in their life. The stories were told by patients, but sometimes they were told by the caregivers. I certainly could have benefited from the stories of others during the early years of learning about albinism. So much of what I Googled was frightening and disparaging. So later, I do want to invite you to share your stories about albinism, to be included in work that I'm engaged in. According to recent research in positive psychology, how we tell our stories controls our mood and our self-image. Stories uplift us, they change our mood, and this is not a small matter. Success stories remind us of how we have been effective in overcoming a hurdle or how we have achieved a goal. This increases our self-esteem and motivates us to try to succeed again. On the other hand, a failure narrative is also powerful. When we tell stories of how we fail, but in a new way, we can enable other people to appreciate their own attempts and give themselves credit for going through a challenge. Here's the reality. Some people are natural communicators. Others of us are just less enthused about talking, especially when it involves some degree of vulnerability. Famed author and researcher Brene Brown said, "The difficult thing is that vulnerability is the first thing I look for in you, but it's the last thing I'm willing to show you. In you, it's courage, but in me, it's weakness." Vulnerability is about showing up as your authentic self and sharing the truth about yourself with intention, regardless of social expectations. And y'all, that's tough to do, especially when you're terrified about what people might see or think. Showing up and being seen is no easy task. There may be a constant whispering thought of, "You're not good enough," or in my case, "You've got a child with albinism and you don't know what you're doing." The good news is that people are hungry for folks who have the courage to say, "I need help, I own that mistake," or in my case, "I need to find people who understand what raising a child with albinism is like." In general, people connect more with those who own their challenges and weaknesses. Think about it. Every superhero has a weakness. Superman's weakness is what? Kryptonite. Thank you. Iron Man, he's got a bad heart. And me, I can't say no to a good pair of shoes. No, really, what makes us all one thing we have in common is not that we're superheroes, but that we have vulnerabilities and they're relatable. A little over 3 years ago, I shared my relationship with albinism to the largest group of folks I'd ever talked to at the time. It was about 300 of my closest strangers in Birmingham during the Birmingham TEDx talk. The talk was given on my father's first heavenly birthday. He had just died about 5 months prior, and my grief was still pretty fresh. By the way, the talk is available on YouTube if you're interested. But on that day, I shared how I was with a newborn son who looked different, at least from what we expected. And in that talk, I told a little bit of this story. I had a relative, they're not here by the way. I had a relative who told me to check my son's earlobes. I was suggested to check his cuticles, even his scrotum, and the crack of his butt. Now, the person who made these suggestions, they were trying to make me feel better. You see, in the Black or African American community, there's this idea that those particular spaces on the body tend to darken first. And checking was going to allow us to discover his true color when it would emerge. And then I was embarrassed to admit this and not very proud of it today, but I checked. And guess what I found? Nothing. Exactly. Exactly. But as I stated, these unofficial tests were supposed to help me locate authentic Blackness in my son. And when those tests did not reveal what seemed to have been missing, that's when we began to climb up and around the family tree. I had relatives that asked me to recall every light-skinned person I had ever seen or heard of, y'all. Anything to try to explain his complexion. They would say stuff like, you know, so-and-so was light-skinned, or your great-great whomever was real fair. Maybe there's a white person or a mixed person in your family. What about your husband's side? Someone even linked my son's light skin tone to our family's lineage or history of slavery. Bottom line is, they wanted me to know and understand that there's a script, if you will, for race. And all of us have these kinds of scripts, right, that align with our cultural and racial identities. I know that Black people are varying shades of brown, and for many reasons other than albinism. But at the time when we considered our beautiful caramel-colored daughter, my typically pigmented husband, and myself, we were left with questions. And y'all, it was a Maury Povich moment. Giving birth to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, I looked at my husband and I said, "You are the father." We needed an explanation. You see, I'm sharing this story because it's these kinds of early experiences that made up my introduction to albinism. And what they did is establish albinism as something that needed to be explained anytime to someone for any reason. And before my son was born, I never even heard of albinism. Now, I heard the word albino, but I wasn't entirely sure of what that meant. But every time it was uttered in those early years, it really seemed to stand out. I didn't like how it made me feel. It was just almost like it was used to describe him before his name, or to convey that something was wrong. But now I understand why albinism is such a novelty for others. Some folks are just not familiar with it by its name, and they certainly are not familiar with our lived experience as a part of the community. I talked about those early days of being a young family of 4. I also shared how I used to cover my kid's head with hats and his eyes with sunglasses, and yes, partially to protect him from the sun's harsh rays, but again, I'm being vulnerable. I was also practicing some avoidance. I wanted to avoid probing questions, comments about his color. I spent the first few months behaving and speaking with frustration. And I realized that I needed to improve how I communicated about albinism, because both of my children were watching and listening to me and taking their cues for how to communicate from me. I wanted to share the truth about albinism without subscribing to the proverbial albino weirdness. So I thrust myself into learning everything I could about albinism. And what happened is, my responses to others changed. My reactions to others changed. I reframed our story, and I did it fast. This kind of intentional communication is something that I've been working to explain to my children, to our extended family, our friends, and now I'm talking about it with you. You see, in our home, we talk candidly about albinism, and we talk about it as a kind of racial construct, in addition to our Black identity. And this is because for us, we live race as a social construct daily. It is a communication tool that everybody uses to cluster physical characteristics and understand groups of people and their cultural practices. As a communication professor, I am interested in the relationship between race and communication. It's an intersection that I enjoy studying. It's a topic that comes up a lot in my Southern private Christian classrooms. It's why I feel compelled to teach my son to craft his own identity about being a Black male with albinism. Research suggests that a child's self-esteem is heavily influenced by their environment. And children with damaged self-esteem are at a greater risk for developing psychological and social problems. So as a parent, this is just one of the things that concerns me. And it's why I have a sense of urgency to talk and teach about difference and to appreciate the differences of others. I tell my son his identity of albinism is a positive distinction, not a point of racial juxtaposition. So 2 months ago, my son turned 10 years old. He thinks that having albinism is one of his best qualities. And I believe it's because we talk about it like it is. I've researched and analyzed the implications of storytelling, but as a mother, I'm speaking as a mother right now, I know that telling your story works. I've heard my son speaking openly about his vision impairment, and he self-identifies as being Black with albinism. And I'm so proud of the stories that his teachers share with me about how he advocates for himself in the classroom, the little opportunities that he takes to insert albinism and his challenges into his class assignments. I'm going to give y'all one quick example. I hope this doesn't embarrass you, Bella. One specific example I love was a class presentation that he gave just this past school year. His teacher had asked the students to perform kind of like a Shark Tank style assignment. She had designed this persuasive writing, quasi-research. It made my communication professor heart swell. For the assignment, she asked students to create an invention. And the invention was supposed to solve a problem. Then they were to share the invention in an oral presentation in class and have a drawing or an image to accompany it. Now, I am proud to report that my son invented and presented the X-Acto cane. Now, you have to know my kid to understand why this was so him. When he told me he was inventing the exacto cane, he said it was modeled after his white cane. And I said, oh Lord. I knew that it was somehow going to evolve into a Pokemon or a sword of some sorts. But no, he stayed on task. He envisioned that the cane would be equipped with a sensor to warn its user of hazards ahead. Now, I'm talking about a 10-year-old fourth grader. So what do you think some of the hazards were going to be? Dog poop, chewing gum, and any other icky substance waiting to ruin a fourth grader's day. But what I love the most, of course, is his imagination. But really, it was how he used the assignment as an opportunity to tell a little bit of his story. He educated his classmates and even his teacher about what it means to be visually impaired. And that's pretty cool, don't you think? So again, sharing stories like these help our kids and ourselves see that we are uniquely made. We have to believe that we possess something greater than what others outwardly see, despite any stereotype about our identity. And that's with or without albinism. But I'm going to be transparent again. This is something that I'm still working on. Routinely, I think about my story and why sharing it is important. And this has me thinking about why we all need to acknowledge our experiences, but be willing to share them in ways that are authentic to who we are. Have you and do you share your story? How does your fashion choices, your social media posts, your conversations with strangers, heart-to-heart talks with family and friends, verbalize your experiences in this community? How can your story improve the culture of discrimination, bullying? How does your story help another person see albinism more holistically, confidently, inclusively? And while I'm asking these questions, yes, to partially challenge you, I want you to think about the ways in which you might work your story into your life and into your interactions with others. It's easy to do at a conference like this where it's obvious we share commonalities, but I'm talking about in your everyday life. Now, before I end, I do want to acknowledge that there is a consequence to storytelling. It is not lost on me that we all are a part of a population of people, or we're connected to this population of people with experiences that can be very triggering. We can become triggered by experiences, words, certain terminologies that will remind us of painful feelings. It's like reopening a wound that hasn't had a chance to heal. I still find myself triggered by someone who seems to stare just a little too long. And I'm not always thrilled when someone makes a comment about how my son sees. When we experience triggers, our bodies kick off a complex process of self-protection. It readies us in 3 possible ways: fight, flight, or freeze. Adrenaline spikes, stress hormones like cortisol, surge through our bodies. And when that stress hormone is released, we can lose touch with healthy coping skills and succumb to reacting rather than responding. We don't have time for me to tell you stories about how I've responded. You'd have to watch the TED Talk for that. But I want to talk about the proper way. First, notice that internal shift. Recognize what triggers you. Identify that trigger, give it a name. Try to locate the moment where things went from being okay to not okay. Then name your feelings. Notice how you feel when you're triggered. Do you feel sad, anxious, angry? One way to become in touch with your feelings is to notice the sensations in your body. Sadness might feel like heaviness. Shame might feel like a bad feeling in the pit of your stomach. Anger can feel like heat. That's what happens to me. But once you understand your trigger, you give it a name, you get to the root of it. Ask yourself these questions. What does this remind me of? What are these feelings familiar to? And what are my thoughts and emotions? Recalling some encounters and experiences, especially if they're negative, is emotional labor. And quite frankly, it's labor that some of us don't want to take on, and that is okay. Please believe I am not walking around and seizing every moment to talk about albinism. Sometimes you just have to figure out, when is it a good time to share my story? Is this a safe space like therapy or support group or at the NOAHCon? Maybe your story is best shared privately, like within your journal or during your prayer time or meditative thoughts. Either way, accept your feelings, feel them so that you can heal them. Be gentle with yourself and try to stay as non-judgmental about your story as possible. So this is where your power comes into play. For me, talking and sharing my story related to albinism is how I access and create community. It's how I accomplish the feeling of doing something in those early days when I didn't know what to do. Not everyone can attend this conference, and not everyone has a person with albinism in their community. And so what most folks tend to do is Google. And let me tell you, there is a void in the real stories about albinism. And I'm not talking about the scary images of people with albinism with those black boxes over their eyes to conceal their identity. I'm talking about the real world lived experiences. And here is where I'd like to invite you to share your stories of albinism with me. In the introduction, Karen mentioned a book I recently published that explored the media depictions of albinism. And I'd like to expand that now outside of media to the real world lived experiences. Here in a moment, I'll put up a QR code. And with your help, I'd like to explore and share authentic accounts that benefit real people. Here's the deal. We cannot change the things that we've been through or the people who have been actors or characters in our stories, but we can change whether or not our stories get told with accuracy. So with that, I invite you to share your stories of albinism with me and others. Actively listen when others are sharing, but most importantly, be willing to share. Thank you so much and have a great great conference. Again, here's the QR code. Save it. Can you see it? There we go. All right. And I'm available for questions, or you can send me an email. My contact information is also available through the QR code. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Yeah, one more round of applause for Dr. Miller. Thank you so much. Our stories are so powerful. And I like when she said, all we've got to do is show up. We've got to show up and continue to tell our story, because our stories are all a work in progress. So thank you again for those wonderful words for our keynote. And just in case you didn't get to get the QR code off the projector, it is in our program, so you can get it out of your program. I think it's on page 26 of your program. So today we're gonna leave this room in just a second, but we've got a lot of great things going on today. So I know you all made it out here, but be sure to look at your conference map in your program booklet, because there are a lot of things going on in a lot of different places. Next, we do have our latest research program. We've got a lot of great forums going on this morning. We've got those pre-lunch meetups that I've been talking about, where you can meet up with your friends, new or old. And then, of course, we'll be back in here for lunch today. Don't forget your badge. Gotta wear your badge, it's kind of like your lunch ticket, so don't forget your badge. This afternoon we've got Ask the Doctors for both our PWAs and non-PWAs. Those are persons with albinism. We're back in here with Rick Rodati for positive exposure this afternoon. And all day today we've got our vendors in the vendor exchange in the Sable Ballroom D1. So make sure you stop and visit those places as well in the Sable foyer. D1 is our community room, and those are where our NOAA talks are going to happen. Again, I've said that's kind of a session schedule within our session schedule. And as promised, I have a few awards announcements to make. So if you participated in the scavenger hunt at Disney Springs yesterday, Adam Aria, Ashley Tokers, Battles Beauties, Mr. JCB and Mr. BXB, the Rogers family, Shapiro Girls, and Wonderfully Wacky Williams were all winners of our scavenger hunt yesterday. So good job! All right, that'll conclude our keynote address this morning.